Well, hey, howdy, hi, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for stopping by to join me today. I really do appreciate it. My name is Ellie and I'm a witch, and this over here is my teaching assistant Andy, and today is going to be day 3 of my Dark Deeds and Demons series. Now, I did say that I was going to do 2 videos today. I changed my mind on that one. This one is a really heavy case. And I couldn't do 2 videos in one day, unfortunately. So instead, you're not going to get another true crime video tomorrow. You're instead going to be getting the misheard history that I was supposed to be filming today, which is superstitions. So just this video, this one is going to be a little bit longer, and like I said, it is heavy, so I couldn't handle doing 2 cases back to back. I've been trying to keep these intros pretty short so I can just get to the part that you're here for, but I do have, of course, the shot. You can kind of tell what I was going for if I hold it down here, like the candy corn, the yellow, orange, white. It kind of just looks, there he goes, orange on camera, but wish me luck. You know, considering that had milk in it, that really wasn't that bad. I'll go at 7.5 out of 10, which actually makes that the best shot so far. Don't know how I feel about that, but anyway, let's go ahead and jump into this case. So like I said, it is a heavy case, so a few trigger warning before we start. There's going to be mentions of murder, pedophilia, mutilation of a corpse, mentions of rape and sexual assault, and then mentions of cannibalistic tendencies. If any of that is not something that you think that you can handle, I totally understand. I do have other videos on my channel, and of course I have videos coming out tomorrow as well, if that is something that you would prefer to see. So today's case is about Friedrich Heinrich Karl Fritz Harman, also known as the Vampire of Hanover, the Butcher of Hanover, or the Wolfman, and is the subject of today's video. I will be referring to him as Fritz throughout this video. Now, Fritz was born October 25th of 1879, which I actually did not know prior to planning this video today, so timing is a little bit off. But he was the 6th child to the family, making him the youngest sibling, born to parents Johanna and Ollie Harman. Growing up, he was said to be a quiet kid with very few friends, which didn't seem to bother him as he chose to associate more with his siblings outside of school. He was said to have been more of a feminine child, choosing to avoid boys' activities and instead play with his sister's dolls and dress up in their clothes. He also had a passion for cooking and needlework. Now, his mother doted on him, and Fritz developed a very strong bond with her. This is also in part to the fact that his father was not present, having little time for his wife and children. Now, his father was a known womanizer, constantly cheating on his wife, and at one point even contracted syphilis. While the marriage was not healthy, the couple did stay together until Johanna's death in 1901. In 1886, Fritz began school, and his teachers noted that he was spoiled and was a daydreamer. On top of his behavior, he was a below-average student when it came to academics, and he had to repeat a year of school twice. Now, when he was about 8 years old, he was molested by a teacher, but he never went into details about the encounter. Now, Fritz did quit school in 1894 with his parents' permission. Upon leaving, he got a job as an apprentice locksmith before choosing to enroll in the military academy at age 15. Now, he started at the academy on April 4th of 1895. Now, at first, Fritz adapted well to military life. However, after only 5 months, he began to suffer blackouts and lost time. The initial diagnosis was anxiety neurosis, but that was changed to an illness equivalent to epilepsy in October of 1895. He chose to discharge himself from the military and returned to Hanover, where he began working in his father's cigar factory. At 16, Fritz committed his first known sexual offense. All of his sexual offenses involved young boys who he would lure to secluded areas before he sexually abused them. His first arrest was in July of 1896. Following further offenses, the Division for Criminal Matters chose to place Fritz in a mental institution in February of 1897. He was briefly sent to Hanover Hospital for a psychiatric evaluation, and he would be certified as incurably deranged, meaning he was not fit to stand trial. He was ordered to be sent to the mental institution indefinitely. In January of 1898, Fritz escaped the institution. He supposedly had help from his mother, but he fled to Switzerland, where he lived with a relative of his mother and was able to gain employment as a handyman in a shipyard. He stayed away for about 16 months, but returned to Hanover in April of 1899. In the early months of 1900, he became engaged to a woman named Erna Lowert, who became pregnant with his child. In October of the same year, Fritz received his call for mandatory military service. He He deployed on October 12th of 1900 and served in the No. 10 Rifle Battalion. Fritz had a good reputation as an exemplary soldier and excellent marksman. He later described this time in his life as the happiest part of his entire life. Now, Fritz ended up collapsing while on an exercise in October of 1901 and began to suffer dizzy spells afterwards and was hospitalized. He was deemed unsuitable for military service and work and was discharged on July 28th of 1902. His diagnosis at discharge was listed as probable dementia precox. Due to his discharge, Fritz received a monthly pension of 21 gold marks, which was about $90 at the time and roughly $3,300 today. He returned to Hanover to be with Erna, and he began working at his father's factory once again. While at the factory, he filed a lawsuit against his father, citing being unable to work due to his ailments noted by the military. His father was able to contest the lawsuit, and the charges were dropped. The next year, Fritz and his father had gotten into a violent altercation, and as a result, his father tried, unsuccessfully, to bring a lawsuit against Fritz. The charges were dropped, but Fritz was to undergo another psychiatric exam in May of 1903. This exam concluded that his morals were not on par with other people, but he was not mentally unstable. Fritz eventually opened a fishmongery with his fiancée, though Fritz attempted to work as an insurance salesman before he was officially classified as disabled. Once he was classified, his pension increased a small amount. That same year, Fritz accused his pregnant fiancée of having an affair with her student. She called off the engagement, and since the fishmongery was in her name, she simply told Fritz to vacate the premises. For the next decade, Fritz made his living being a petty thief, burglar, and con artist. He did have a few real jobs, but he would steal from customers and employers, so those jobs never lasted long. Starting in 1905, he served several short prison sentences for larceny, embezzlement, and assault. Now, Fritz spent most of 1905 to 1912 in prison. In 1913, he was arrested for burglary, and police found stolen property that linked him to several other burglaries. He pleaded not guilty, but was convicted and sentenced to 5 years. Now, the timing was not ideal, as there was a draft due to World War I. This allowed Fritz to work outside of the jail during the day, but he was meant to return at night, which he did. Now, he successfully completed his sentence and was released in April of 1918. He moved to Berlin shortly, but chose to return to Hanover and live with one of his sisters in August of 1918. As a result of the devastated economy following World War I, Fritz returned to his life of crime, creating a network of criminals he could trade stolen property with. Now, despite his extensive criminal past, he was able to establish a relationship with law enforcement as an informant. Really, the goal was to take the heat off of his own crimes and to be able to have better access to young boys. Fritz would often set up meetings with his criminal contacts and give that information to the police, who would raid the meetings. As to not blow his cover, Fritz would be arrested too, but no charges were brought against him. Fritz was also known to perform citizen's arrest on those he found traveling with forged documents. Thanks to his hard work, the police relied heavily on him as a source of reliable information and gave him more freedoms to patrol the station as he pleased. Between 1918 and 1924, Fritz committed at least 24 murders, although it is suspected that he had at least 27 victims. All his victims were males between the age of 10 and 22, though most were in their mid to late teens. The boys were all lured to one of 3 addresses associated with Fritz. He lured them in on the promise of assistance, accommodations, work, or under the pretense of arrest. Once they were at the locations, they were given food and a drink before Fritz strangled the victims and bit into their Adam's apples. Some victims died from asphyxiation, but others had been bitten so hard that Fritz made it through their Adam's apples and tracheas. Fritz referred to this act as giving a love bite. Fritz then dismembered the bodies before discarding them into the Lean River. His first victim had been buried following the dismemberment, and his last victim was thrown into a lake at the entrance of the Herrenhausen Gardens. Fritz kept personal possessions of the victims, either for himself or his lover, Hans Grons. Some items were sold or given away as gifts, though. After Fritz was arrested, there were rumors that he ate the victim's flesh or had sold the victim's meat to the black market, but called it pork or horse meat. There was, and is, no evidence of those claims, though. However, Fritz was a known meat dealer. He said that he got his meat from a butcher named Carl. However, there is no Carl that could be found, and the name of the butcher changed as Fritz retold the story. More about each specific murder. So the first known victim was 17-year-old Friedrich Roth. He disappeared on September 25th of 1918, and his friends reported to police that he was last seen with Fritz. Now, police raided his apartment in October, and he was caught with a 13-year-old boy. As a result, he was charged with sexual assault and battery of a minor and sentenced to 9 months. Now, Fritz managed to avoid serving his sentence through 1919. He then met 18-year-old Hans Grans in October. He had run away following an argument with his father and had been sleeping on the street and selling his clothes in and around Hanover for 2 weeks before meeting Fritz. Now, Hans' confession to the police stated that he was straight and identified as heterosexual. He had initiated contact with Fritz with the intention of prostituting himself, though. Fritz said that he had viewed Hans as a son, saying he pulled him out of a ditch and tried to make sure he didn't go to the dogs. Now, Fritz had invited Hans to live with him, and from there, they became lovers, and Hans became an accomplice. Fritz said he was initially smitten with Hans, but did understand he was manipulative and even mocked Fritz. Hans was evicted a few times following arguments, but Fritz always begged him to come back. After he was sentenced to 9 months in prison, he was still able to gain back the trust of police and began doing informant work once again. It was through this connection that he found the house he and Hans moved into on July 1st of 1921. Back to the victims, though. The second known victim was a 17-year-old Fritz Franke, and the two had met at Central Station, where the boy was invited back to the older man's house to meet Hans and 2 female acquaintances, one of which was actually Hans' female partner. According to the female partner, Hans told her, "Hey, he's going to be trampled on today." The 2 women left but returned the next day and were told that the boy had traveled to Hamburg. There is speculation about what Hans' involvement was and if he had actually said anything to the 2 women that night. According to Fritz, Hans had returned to the house that night to find the boy naked on the bed and simply asked Fritz, "When shall I come back again?" 5 weeks after the second murder, Fritz met 17-year-old Wilhelm Schulz at Hanover Station. Wilhelm had been traveling to work when he met Fritz. Now, no body has ever been identified as Wilhelm, but his clothes were found in the possession of Fritz's landlady, Elizabeth Engel. The next 2 victims were 16-year-old Ronald Hutch, who had actually told friends prior that he was running away to join the Marines, and 19-year-old Hans Sonnenfeld, whose yellow coat was a favorite possession of Fritz's following the murder. June 9th of 1923, Fritz moved into a single-room attic apartment. It was just 2 weeks after he moved in that his neighbor's 13-year-old son, Ernest Ehrenberg, disappeared. The boy's school hat and suspenders were found in Fritz's apartment. 2 months later, 18-year-old Heinrich Strauss was reported missing. Multiple belongings of his would be found in Fritz's possession. The next month, 17-year-old Paul Broniszewski disappeared while traveling to Bochum. The theory is that Paul and Fritz were on the same train at Hanover. His jacket, backpack, pants, and towel were found after Fritz was arrested. The next victim was 17-year-old Richard Grafe, who disappeared around September 30th of 1923, and he'd actually told his family he met someone at Hanover Station who knows of a good job for me. 2 weeks later, on October 12th, 16-year-old Wilhelm Erdner didn't return home after work. His parents revealed that Wilhelm had actually become acquainted with Detective Fritz Honnerbrock, a pseudonym for Fritz, shortly before he disappeared. Fritz and Hans sold Wilhelm's bike on October 20th. Now, within a week of October 20th, 2 more victims have been killed: 15-year-old Hermann Wolf and 13-year-old Heinz Brinkmann. November 10th of 1923, 17-year-old Adolf Hennepel, a carpenter's apprentice, disappeared from Hanover Station. Witnesses say that Adolf had been waiting on a trunk in the waiting room. Those witnesses also identified Hans and Fritz, who were said to have been pointing at Adolf, who was later seen walking to the cafe all together. A month later, in December, 19-year-old Adolf Heines disappeared. He had been searching for work at the time, and again, no remains were found and identified. However, Fritz specifically admitted to dismembering his body, but not killing him. Hans' testimony about this victim said that the body was missing the signature "love bite," but when he found him on Fritz's bed, he told the man it was one of his. This meant neither man was convicted of the murder due to the conflicting testimony. The first victim of 1924 was 17-year-old Ernest Spiker, who disappeared January 5th. Now, it seems that the two knew each other before the murder, but Fritz said that he just assumed Ernest was one of his victims since his possessions were found in his apartment. January 15th, the next victim, 20-year-old Heinrich Koch, was killed. It is believed that the victim was also acquainted with Fritz prior to the murder. The next month, 2 more victims for Fritz, 19-year-old Willie Singer and 16-year-old Hermann Spikert. The next killing took place on April 1st, and that was of Hermann Bach. The two had been known acquaintances, but Fritz was actually cleared of this murder at the trial. However, Fritz had Bach's clothing, his landlady had Bach's suitcase, and Fritz had been actively dissuading Bach's friends from reporting him missing. A week later, 16-year-old Alfred Hogreave disappeared from Hanover Station after running away on April 2nd. The next murder was April 17th of 16-year-old Wilhelm Appel, who had been known to Fritz while he was on patrol as an informant. On April 26th, the 18-year-old Robert Witzel disappeared. It was said that Robert had been accompanied by an official from the railway station to the circus. Fritz admitted that he killed Robert and threw his dismembered body parts into the Lean River. 2 weeks later, Fritz killed 14-year-old Heinz Martin. The assumption is that he was abducted from Hanover Station and his clothes were found in Fritz's possession. On May 26, 17-year-old Fritz Whitting was the next victim. This boy was killed because Hans wanted the suit that he was wearing. That same day, Fritz found his youngest victim, 10-year-old Friedrich Abling, who disappeared from school. 2 weeks later, Fritz found a 16-year-old Friedrich Koch on his way to college. 2 friends were walking with Friedrich that day and said that Fritz walked up to them and asked, "Well, boy, don't you recognize me?" The last victim was 17-year-old Eric de Vries, who was killed June 14th of 1924. The two met at Hanover Station, and his body was later found in a lake at the entrance of Herrenhausen Gardens. On May 17th of 1924, the first skull was found by 2 children. After that, several other bones would be found during the following months. On June 8th, hundreds of Hanover residents all came together to search for more bones that were then turned over to police. 22 separate bodies were found from this search. Now, suspicion quickly fell on Fritz. He was known to police as a homosexual who had 15 previous convictions for several child assault charges. It was also known that Fritz was known to frequent Hanover Station as an informant. Fritz had also been connected to the disappearance of Friedel Roth and Hermann Koch, which had caused Fritz to be put under surveillance on June 18th of 1924. On June 22nd, police observed Fritz arguing with 15-year-old Karl Fromm. Fritz tried to say he caught Karl with forged documents, but Karl said that he had been living with Fritz and had been raped several times by him and had a knife held to his throat during some of these incidents. Fritz was arrested and charged with sexual assault. His apartment was raided following the arrest. The floors, wall, and bedding were excessively blood-stained. Now, there was an attempt to cover this by claiming the blood came from his illegal meat-selling business, but obviously no one bought this, especially after clothes and belongings of the victims were found. Now, Fritz ended up confessing to raping, killing, and dismembering many of the young men in what he called a rabid sexual passion. He said he never intended to kill anyone, but he would get this irresistible urge to bite through their Adam's apples in the throes of passion. Fritz was adamant that he did not take pleasure in the dismemberment and had been sick for over a week following the first murder. He insisted, however, his passion in the moment of these murders was stronger than the horrors of the cutting and chopping. So this next part is a graphic description of the dismemberment, so be warned. To be able to get through the dismemberment, he would pour himself a strong black coffee and then place the body on the floor with a cloth over their face. He would first remove the intestines, which were placed into a bucket. A towel was placed into the abdomen to collect blood. He would then make 3 cuts between the ribs and shoulder. He would then take hold of the ribs and push until the bones around the shoulder broke. The heart, lung, and kidney would be removed, diced, and placed into the bucket with the other intestines. The legs and arms were then removed. Fritz would then use a paring knife to remove the flesh from the limbs and torso. This flesh would be flushed or thrown into the nearby river. The head was the last part to be removed, and a knife was used to remove the flesh from the skull. The skull was then wrapped in rags, placed on a pile of straw, and bludgeoned with an axe until the skull splintered enough for the brain to be removed. The brain was placed in the bucket as well, the contents of which were poured into the Lean River along with the chopped up bones. Now, during his confession, Fritz estimated his victim count to be 50 to 70, however, police could only tie 27 disappearances to him. He was only charged with the 27 murders as a result. Hans was arrested as an accessory on July 8th, but wasn't officially charged until a week later. On August 16th, Fritz underwent another psychological exam, but was found competent to stand trial. At the trial, Fritz represented himself, and in 14 of the 27 charges, he acknowledged his guilt. The other 13 he claimed to be unable to identify the victims. Hans pleaded not guilty as an accessory. The trial also included testimony about the police knowing Fritz was conducting criminal activity after his release in 1918. The police had not suspected him for the crimes, even though they received witness statements stating Fritz was seen with the victims. They also didn't suspect him despite knowing his extensive rap sheet of offenses against minors. The trial lasted 2 weeks and a total of 190 witnesses testified. On December 19th of 1924, Fritz was found guilty of 24 of the murders and sentenced to beheading. In response to the verdict, Fritz said, "I accept the verdict fully and freely. I should go to the decapitating block joyfully and happily." Now, Hans was hysterical when he found that he was guilty of incitement to murder and also sentenced to death by beheading. Fritz made no attempts to appeal the sentence, but Hans did, though the appeal was rejected. April 25th of 1925 at 6 a.m., Fritz was beheaded by guillotine. Now, he was not aware of the execution date until the evening prior, in accordance with German tradition. After he heard the news, he prayed with his pastor and was granted his last wish, to have an expensive cigar and a Brazilian coffee. According to witnesses, Fritz was pale and nervous but put on a bravado as he walked to the guillotine, his last words being, "I am guilty, gentlemen, but hard though as it may be, I want to die as a man. I repent, but I do not fear death." And that is all that I have for you today. A very difficult case to learn about, and I'm sure to hear, but a very fascinating one. It was actually pretty difficult to find information about this case. The name seems to be pretty well known, but overall there's not a ton of information. There's a few books written. There was more books than anything that I could really get for reference, and very, very few articles, which surprised me, but hopefully this gives a little bit more awareness to the case and all of those lives that were lost. If I said any names wrong, or if you want to correct anything that you guys know of, please, if you have any other sources, let me know, or if you have any other facts about the case that I missed, again, please let me know. It was pretty difficult to get information. As I said earlier, I decided to move the Misheard History episode that I had planned for today to tomorrow because this was just a lot for me to research and to tell you guys about. So you're actually gonna be getting 2 history videos tomorrow because, funny enough, tomorrow is actually already the one misheard history I had included with the series, and that is going to be Tuesday the 13th versus Friday the 13th. Which is also just happens to be the perfect tie into the superstitions thing, but obviously I'll tell you guys about that tomorrow. Hopefully everybody figured out that I was a scarecrow today. And of course Andy is a little mummy. This didn't really work out as good as I thought it was going to. It's a little bit too see-through and white, so I gave him a little mummy friend. You guys can't even see that it's a little mummy friend. It's a little mummy friend, and he's just hanging out to tell you guys it's mummy. But I hope that you guys have a great rest of your night, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye!